all the questions are based on this scenario. All the questions are based on this scenario. And so let's get started. Can I have someone read a scenario for us, please?
As a social care worker,
yes,
with responsibilities for safeguarding work in your care setting, write an article with information on requirements for safeguarding in adult care. How public inquiries and serious failings inform practice, implementation of policies and procedures to support safeguarding in adult care, mental capacity and consent, the use and impact of restrictive practices, local systems for safeguarding children and young people, supporting safeguarding of young children and young people encountered in an adult social care service, as set out in the following tasks. AC 1.2, explain the current legislative framework and national guidance that underpins the safeguarding of adults.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Flora. Yes, so what Flora read, the scenario is what sets the basis for our assignment. So the scenario tells you who you are and from which angle you are approaching these questions. So that's very important. So you're writing this assignment in your position as a social worker who has responsibility for safeguarding work in the setting that you are working. AC means assessment criteria or criterion. Criterion is singular, criteria is plural. So the first question is, which Flora read, explain. Now, everything you see in black in terms of the questions are the assignment question. What you see in blue is the breakdown, trying to tell you how to answer the question. Okay, so what you see in blue is not part of the original question. That is my addition to the question to try to make it simpler to understand what you need to do to be able to answer that question or what we expect from you. So the question is, explain the current legislative framework and national guidance that underpins the safeguarding of adults. So I'm going to explain some keywords. When we say legislative framework, simply it means what is the law? What law is there? So legislative framework simply refers to law. In other words, saying what is the law on safeguarding? What law forms the foundation for safeguarding of adults? So the current legislative framework and national guidance. So national guidance has to do with regulation. So we have laws and we have regulations. Okay. That underpin, that forms the basis or the foundation for safeguarding of adults. In other words, state and explain 4 laws that underpin or support safeguarding of adults. And we thought on that. So there are laws that have to do with that. And so you just refer to them and explain. Don't forget, always refer to the first word of the question. The first word of the question is explain. So when we are explaining, we are not bullet pointing, we are not numbering, we are writing in paragraphs, a point to a paragraph with key examples. Okay. Then the second question, which is AC 2, assessment criterion 1.2, describe local systems, procedures, and agencies relating to adult safeguarding and own role within this. So it's a lot of words, but you only have to look at what are the key things in this question and just focus on that. Forget about the fact that it's a long sentence. And so simply it's saying which local authority systems regulate safeguarding in your local area? That's the first part of the question. So in every local area, for example, if you take Newham, or you take Redbridge, or you take Enfield, every local area has responsibility in terms of the local council, has responsibility to implement the national law in the local area. So you will see there is something called Local Safeguarding Board, LSB. So Local Safeguarding Board. It's in every local area, local authority area. So you have to look at the local authority systems in your area, how they regulate safeguarding, and how do you access them as a health and social care professional. I'm going to explain it further. So let's assume you are working as a social worker, or you're working as a care worker, or a care home manager, and there is a safeguarding issue in your setting, your workplace. How are you going to handle it? Simply, this is what the question is saying. So what would you do? So the first thing to do in terms of explaining how the system works in your area and what the procedures are is, in your own workplace, there is a safeguarding lead or the safeguarding officer. So that is the first person that you refer the issue to. And then the safeguarding officer will look at the issue internally in relation to your workplace policy. Now, policies and procedures are always very, very important. You start with the workplace policy. What is the policy of this workplace? What is the procedure? What are the steps that we need to take? And then the safeguarding lead of your workplace will now escalate the issue to the local safeguarding board, which is within the local council in your area. And then the local safeguarding board, if they see that it is beyond them, will now involve the Metropolitan Police. And in relation to whatever issue it is, if it has to do with abuse, neglect, harm, or any of those things that come under safeguarding. And then, so it goes like that. So each step and the procedures to follow. So you talk the steps through, and you talk about what your own role is in relation to that asset. So when it says HSC, is Health and Social Care Professional, that is just my abbreviation for it. All right. Okay. If something is not clear, let me know. It's a lot of questions, and we need to get through them. So 1.3, explain how national and local guidelines, policies, and procedures for safeguarding affect, number one, day-to-day work with individuals, how you do your work. Number two, your own responsible carers and your team members. So basically, when you look at what I highlighted in blue, it means what are your agreed ways of working in relation to national and local guidelines, policies, and procedures for safeguard. What are agreed ways of working? Agreed ways of working is your contract. What is stated in your contract in relation to how you're supposed to do your work? What are your responsibilities? What are your roles? Which policies are you supposed to abide by? Which code of conduct are you supposed to follow? Those are agreed ways of work. So when it talks about the national and local guidelines and policies and procedures for safeguarding, which you are supposed to follow in your day-to-day work with individuals as a health and social care professional, I'm going to talk about what national laws are the policies of my workplace based on. For example, if you take the health and safety policy, or the safeguarding policy, or the equality policy, or the data protection policy of your workplace, it is based on the national guidance. National guidance is the law of the land. on which it is based. So you are going to explain. You talk about the law, and you talk about how it mandates you to do your work. Okay. And then it says the second one is your own responsibility towards individuals, families, carers, and team members. You have to make sure, I have to make sure that I safeguard the interest of all service users in relation to the policy. You always have to refer to the policy and the procedure to make sure they are all safe. If you, for those before Richard and Flora joined, we watched a video on safeguarding winterborn view. We're going to refer to that later on as we go ahead. Any questions so far? Okay, if there's no question, Lalita, please could you? Yes, thank you. You are doing so well. Right, so where are we? 1.3. Let it come down a little bit, please. I can't see 1.3. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Okay, it's 1.4 rather. Thank you. It's okay. So explain own role. When it says own role, it's talking about your own role in leading a response to suspected or disclosed abuse or neglect. So the questions are a lot of words, but it means something very simple. What it means is this: how do you respond to suspected or disclosed abuse or neglect? So you are working with a service user, and you go to visit the service user, and you suspect that you see some marks on the service user. Those marks were not there when you last visited, okay? And so the marks are indications of physical abuse. So you see them and you suspect. The service user didn't tell you anything. So that is suspected abuse. How would you respond to it? This is what the question is asking you. And the second part of the question is this: how would you respond to disclosed abuse or neglect? So the disclosed abuse or neglect is you go in there and the service user begins to tell you, he's a female service user. Someone came here, the last care worker who came here to work with me was touching me in my private parts. This is disclosure. It's disclosing to you that I've been abused sexually. Whether it is true or not, this is what is disclosed to you. The question is this: how would you respond to it? It was one of the first PowerPoint that we presentations that we treated in our lessons, how to respond to suspected or disclosed abuse or neglect. So please refer to that. All the points of what you need to do are there. And please don't forget a minimum of 4 points for each question, because this is level 4, a level 5. So a minimum of 4. So we expect you to discuss between 4 and 6 points adequately for each question, unless it is clearly stated that it is 4. There are some we have stated you need to keep to minimum of 4. That one, you're okay with 4. All right. Assessment criterion 1.5, describe how. So the first thing is how. It's always important to take note of what the question is asking, because if you answer just one aspect of it, then you're going to be marked under, so you're going to be just marked under, half of what is expected. So describe how, first thing, how and when to engage others in relation to responding to safeguarding concerns. This question is just like 1.4, but it's a little different. So responding to safeguarding concerns. Safeguarding concern could be a suspicion that someone is being abused. It could be a disclosure. Question is this: how will you engage with people? The others is a wide range. It could include the one who is abused. It could also include the abuser. It could also include the family of the victim. So, and it could also include colleagues. So in your answer, you should indicate that the others may include, a wide range of people, for example. So we know that you understand what you're writing. So describe how and when. So how would you engage with them? How to engage with them in one sense means how do you respond to them? What procedure would you use? What steps would you take? So you have to refer to your workplace policy and you have to refer to your workplace procedures. So what is the policy in relation to safeguarding? What is the safeguarding policy? What does it say? In such incidences, what do you do? Everything that you do has to follow policy because it's a regulated environment that we live in. So we don't do things just the way we think. No, we have to make sure we are following the policy. Okay. So how? It's you will follow your workplace policy and procedures. So you have to enumerate or describe what the policy says and how you would apply the policy. Second question is when would you engage? So how and when? So that is very sensitive. It also has to be according to the workplace policy. But again, here you have to use a judgment. If it is emergency, the policy will tell you what to do in emergencies. And we looked at part of that when you can call the police directly if it is emergency and somebody's life is at stake. And if it is not emergency, if it's not urgent and no one is at risk, then it's okay to follow the policy all through. But if it is emergency, somebody is dying, then 999 is what you need to do. But again, it depends on what you are going to describe and how you are looking at it. So in brief, this question is asking you, how do you respond to individuals who disclose to you that they are being abused? How do you respond to them? And the individuals here, we are talking about adult service users. Okay, so it could be residents, they could be people living in their own homes, that's domiciliary care, or people living in a nursing home, in a care home, or in a very sheltered residential homes, or even in a daycare center, because abuse could happen anywhere. So how do you respond to them? Then the second one is, who are the go-to persons? So the go-to persons are the appointed or designated officials. So in every workplace, there is a safeguarding lead, and there are deputy safeguarding leads and other safeguarding officers. So this question wants to see whether you really know the policy and procedures of your workplace as to how things are done and what to do when you find yourself in such a situation. Okay. 1.6, discuss legal provisions in relation to whistleblowing and information sharing. Whistleblowing is you are working in a workplace, something is going wrong, something is not being done right, and then you give information to relevant authorities about what is going on. There is a law that safeguards your interests, whereby you cannot be victimized and you cannot be discriminated against for letting information out. So the question is this: discard the legal provision. What law is there to safeguard people who share relevant information? Okay, that is where there is a breach of confidentiality and data protection and other, related legislation. Simply, the question is asking you. So what you need to do to answer this question is this: first of all, define whistleblowing. What is the meaning of whistleblowing? Number two, define information sharing. What is information sharing? For example, you are working in a place, and let's assume you are working in a care home, and one of the residents tells you, I have a gun here. I'm going to start shooting any moment from now. That's relevant information. You have to share that information. It is not something you keep confidential and keep secret. It tells you don't tell anybody. No, you have to share the information because it is relevant information that has to do with safeguarding of every other person's life in that setting. So you define whistleblowing, define information sharing, and then you discuss which laws or the legislation support whistleblowing and information sharing in a health and social care work environment. Thank you. Lalita, let's go down. 1.7, analyze issues relating to consent. Last week, no, this week we're talking about consent on Monday, isn't it? Analyze issues relating to consent, to share information, and your own responsibilities to share information about suspicion and disclosure of abuse and neglect. So you suspect that a service user is being abused, or the service user tells you, someone is abusing me. Maybe in this case, it's a family member who has been coming here to abuse me, maybe financially or physically or otherwise. And the person tells you, no, don't tell anybody, just keep it to yourself. So what do you think will be the issues bordering around seeking the person's consent to share that information? And what's your responsibility in doing that? So it's either it's been disclosed to you or you suspect it. You carry a suspicion that no, there's something fishy here. There's something that's not right here. I need to let this information out to the authorized official. So that's what that question is. Now, those of us who remember the video we watched on the safeguarding, how service users were bullied, they were physically abused, emotionally abused, and all those other things that happen. That is what 2.1, question 2.1 relates to. Explain how public inquiries into serious failings to uphold individuals' rights to live free from abuse and neglect have impacted national policy and informed practice. Simply, this question says, do you know of any incidents or issue of abuse that was in the news? Was it investigated? Was there an inquiry into it? How did that failure or that abuse incident, okay, and the investigation into it or the review of that bring about a change in the law and a change in how health and social care professionals should do their work? I'm going to break it down further. So when you look at what I put in blue, I'm saying to answer this question, cite 2 case studies that have been in the news. One about abuse or safeguarding, and how that case study, so the case study you're talking about, and the investigation into it, how it led to policy change in relation to professional practice in health and social care. For example, the Winterborne view, you can research on it, you can go on YouTube, you can watch videos on it, you can go on Google, it will give you information on it. You can use Winterborne view. That's all the first video that we watched of the abuse. Now, there was also, I think about 10 years ago, I think last month, there was a news item that Baby P's mother was released from prison. I think I shared this in one of our lessons. Those of you who were here 10 years ago and got that information, that was a serious feeling in heaven where a baby called Baby was physically abused by his mother and the mother's partner. And social workers didn't discover this. They couldn't suspect that something was going on. GP practice didn't suspect it. They didn't see it. This child was going for different appointments and they all didn't see it. People lost their job as a result of this through the investigations and the reviews. And so after the review, the investigation and the review, a lot of things changed in the law. A lot of things changed. So that's another helpful thing you can use. Then we have Victoria Klimby. Victoria Klimby was the East African child whose auntie brought her to the United Kingdom from France, I think. and they lived here. And there was, according to the story, if you read very carefully, get the information. So what happened was that the auntie said there was a suspicion that the child had witchcraft, and the child was taken through some very inhumane, treatment, and a lot of abuse, and different things happened. Finally, the child died, and so there was investigation, and a lot of change in the law came as a result of that. Basically, you can write about any of these two or any other thing that you find related, and that will answer that question. 4.1, describe the link between consent, risk management, and safeguarding. So basically, define consent. What is consent? Define risk management in relation to adult care. Define safeguarding. How do all these three relate? If you look at what we were studying on Monday in terms of consent in relation to mental capacity act, yeah, you should be able to answer that question so easily. It's one of the simplest questions. 4.2, explain key provisions of legislation. Simply telling you what is the law. Key provision of legislation, code of practice, and policy regarding mental capacity and how this relates to the service. It's simply telling you what is mental capacity and which laws underpin the Mental Capacity Act. That's what that question means. So you explain that. 4.3, explain the support available when mental capacity needs to be assessed and how to access this support. It's talking about two different things. We talked about mental capacity, and we say the Mental Capacity Act, it has to be, an individual has to be assessed, and it has to be proved that the person does not have capacity before you proceed further. When you remember what we studied on Monday. This question is telling you, explain the support available when capacity needs to be assessed. So this is an individual, Mr. A. We want to assess Mr. A's mental capacity. Okay. So what support needs to be available to Mr. A in relation to that assessment? How do you need to prepare Mr. A for this assessment? What resources does it need to have access to? We talk about advocacy. We talk about mental capacity, independent mental capacity advocacy, all of those things. When you read on that, it's easy to answer that question. And then how to access the support means how will that be made available to the service user? Okay. You remember there was a form we're looking at, and then after filling the form, there's a referral to be made. All of those relate to that. 4.4, describe practices that support individuals' ability to provide valid consent. We did that. And so you just refer to your notes, and that's so easy for you. What are the procedures to take to be able to support an individual to be able to provide valid consent? 4.5, describe your own role in applying and upholding the key principles of the mental capacity legislation and code of practice. In other words, how would you apply the principles? We talk about the principles, the 6 principles. Is it 6 principles? Yeah. The principles of mental. So you have to talk about the principles and you talk about how you apply them. Okay. We talk about the fact that you don't assume that a person doesn't have capacity. It's one of the principles. Just trying to refresh your memory of the principles and how you apply them. 4.6, discuss your own role in the assessment of risk in situations where an individual's capacity is a concern. All right. So Mr. A, you are not sure that whether Mr. A has capacity or not. So there are concerns. And Mr. A needs to take a decision in relation to his care or his treatment. I was given a scenario the other day that you want to take someone from their home into care, either a care home or a nursing home or a residential home. How do you prepare the person? Explain to the person why you want to take the person into care. The person needs to consent. We don't force it on the person. The person needs to have all the information relevant to that decision and then be able to make that decision. This question is saying, discuss your own role. What is your responsibility in the assessment of the risk in a situation where the individual's capacity is a concern? So how do you carry out risk assessment to be able to, process this? 4.7, clarify. So clarify.
Sorry, sir.
Yes.
I don't get this. Sorry, I'm late. First of all,
No
I had
problem.
an emergency visitor. The thing is, I don't get this part well. How do you assess the person's? How do you seek
Risk
consent
assessment.
from? Yeah.
You're talking about 4.6.
Yeah, the one you just finished. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Very good question. Thank you, Richard. Right. On Monday, towards the end of the session, I was showing you a slide where we saw a toilet seat, remember?
Uh-huh.
Then we saw some other things. What can you remember you saw there?
No, vaguely. I remember the toilet seat.
Okay, so basically.
But also, sorry, sir.
Yes.
We don't have the PowerPoint yet.
It's not been sent to you yet.
No, it's not sent. We don't have it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
None of you has received it at all from Mansi?
I haven't received it, sir.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll follow that up. Right.
Yeah,
so
that will help us to be able to follow what we've learned and then get things better.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yes. So yeah, that's a good question. So the question is this. So let's assume I was very independent, okay? And now I'm becoming frail. I'm losing my vision because of old age. I'm losing my hearing. So I have visual impairment and I have hearing impairment. And I'm having fright of height, fear of height, because I'm not able to move and walk as I used to. Now, there have to be a lot of adaptations and adjustments in my home. Maybe I used to live upstairs. Now I can't go upstairs again because I can't climb the stairs. So these are things that have to do with my health. And because of this, there needs to be an assessment of me and my care to be able to put a care package in place so that if Richard has a care home, my family wants to contact Richard's care home and see if they can put a care package in place to take care of my needs, to know how I should be taken care of. To do that, an assessment needs to be made of the risk factors that I face in relation to my health. The question is this: what is your role as a health and social care professional, particularly someone who is looking after the individual or who has a major say in the care of the individual, in assessing the risk in relation to the individual's capacity to consent to that decision being taken, whereby it's not forced on the individual, but the individual willingly accepts that, okay, I understand that I'm growing old, I understand that I need care, I can't take care of myself, so I agree that this is done for me. Does it make sense now?
It does. So in a way, you are asking about, you're telling the person, this is your situation. Your situation have deteriorated, and we need to move you to this care home. And these are the prevailing conditions.
That's
this is
right.
what we've got. This is what we've got there.
That's
do you consent to we relocating you to this care home based on what we've got available there? And then asking the person whether they will agree to that or not.
Absolutely. And I'm going to refer you are very right there. I'm going to refer you to a statement you made last week. No, this week on Monday, our last lesson. You were talking about, you were explaining a point, and you explained the point by saying that a professional needs to do the assessment. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, yes, good. So your role, my role there, if I'm the person there, will be to make referral to the relevant professionals. So here, point of referral didn't come in because I'm not going to be the one to make the assessment. That was your point you made on Monday.
Yeah.
So a professional, it has to be referred to a professional who will come and do the assessment. So part of my role is to be able to facilitate this, make referrals to other professionals, get them to come to the service users and involve the service users next of kin. You know, we talked about power of attorney, and we said next of kin is not recognized by law. So all of these come into it. So you have to facilitate all of these things to make sure it is all formalized.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you. Good. So 4.7, clarify. Okay, so when we say clarify, basically say explain. It's another word for explain. Your own and other team members' development needs in relating to mental capacity and how mental capacity is practiced or applied. Basically, this is telling you, what do you think are your areas of development when it comes to putting Mental Capacity Act in use? What would be your areas of development? In other words, areas of development is what we used to call weaknesses. Now we don't call them weaknesses, we call them areas of development. Or what are the learning needs? What are the learning targets? There was a word you used the other day, key performance indicators. There was a word you used the other day. Richard used a word the other day when we're talking about some of this. Anyone remembers? So basically, we're looking at, you were talking about reviews, appraisal. So when you do an appraisal, or your manager or your supervisor does your appraisal or your review, they look at what you've done well. They look at where you need to develop or do better or improve. And that is where sometimes they can set targets for you and recommend you to some continuing professional development, CPD. So basically, it's asking you, what do you think are the areas that you need to do some more improvement or development? Training, basically, to be able to have the capability, the competence, and the ability to put this into practice more and more. Yes. 5.1, explain the following terms. This is a very simple question. And the application of each to practice within your own work settings. This question is a threefold question. Explain the terminology. Number 2, explain how you apply it in your own work environment. So you explain the terminology, you explain how you put it into practice, and you have to link everything you are writing to your work environment, following the scenario again. So the first terminology is restrictive practice, RPU. We spend a lot of time on restrictive practice. And then restraint, and then deprivation of liberty, much of which we talked about last week. No, not last week. I keep saying last week, on Monday. So deprivation of liberty is what I told you is called DOLS. Yeah. So you explain them. And 5.2, describe the legal and ethical considerations. Legal and ethical considerations of restricting an individual's rights and freedoms. Question means, under what conditions legally are you allowed, and ethically are you allowed to restrict somebody's, a service user's freedom and rights? So again, I'll point you to a service user with challenging behavior or mental health problems or learning disabilities, who is posing a physical risk to himself or other service users or even the staff. We talk much about that. So what is the law? What is the justification that you can restrict their rights or freedom? Okay. There are times They bring people to the hospital and they have the police who are guarding them. The police are sitting by the person's bedside or just outside their room. Freedom is taken away. Rights are taken away. Why? Because of the risk factor in relation to the people. 5.3. 5.3, describe your own responsibilities in relation to restrictive practice and deprivation of liberty. This question is linked to 5.2, but this one it's saying, what are you supposed to do? What are your roles? What are your responsibilities in relation to this? So you talk about how you follow the law, how you follow the workplace policy and the procedure when there is the need for restrictive practice or deprivation of an individual's liberty or rights. 5.4, explain appropriate and proportionate response to restrictions on an individual's rights and freedoms. Now, I spent some time explaining appropriate and proportionate the other time. So appropriate and proportionate means depending on the level of risk, where you use the least restrictive measure. So if the risk factor is not very much, you don't use, I explained that a lot. You don't use the highest. One of the things I used to explain that was the plus and minus sign. You remember? So please make sure you refer to that slide, that PowerPoint slide. And then 5.5, and then we'll end it there. We'll continue with this on Monday. Analyze the potential impacts of restrictive practice. Here again, we talk a lot about this. The impact is talking about effects of restrictive practice. We said the individual will be depressed. We talk about the fact that it reduces their mortality rate. There is a whole PowerPoint. I think there are 2 slides on the impact. Refer to it. But here, you need to do an analysis. And I say you have to analyze 5 main effects. The effects are there, take them. Don't just explain, please analyze. So in your analysis, you are talking about the advantages, the disadvantages, the advantages to the service provision in terms of the staff, the disadvantages to the service user, how it can affect the service user's health and life. And then you draw a conclusion. Okay, that's how you do your analysis. 5.6, discuss how outcome-based and person-centered practices can mitigate the use of restrictive practices. Simply, it means you are supposed to discuss how the importance and benefits or the advantages of outcome-based and person-centered practice can reduce the use of and the application of RP, means restrictive practice, on an individual. What it means, therefore, is this. You have a child, okay?
Sorry, sir, you were frozen a bit.
Oh, okay. Sorry. It's the network again. All right. So this question is a threefold question. You have to discuss outcome-based and person-centered practice. Outcome-based means what the service user wants to get from the care package. Person-centered practice is giving the service user care that is tailored to their needs, their preferences, their wishes, their likes. And when we do that, most of the time, they tend to calm down. They tend to be very understanding because we are going the extra mile to meet their needs. The question is this: what are the advantages and what are the advantages or the benefits or the importance of outcome-based practice and person-centered practice? And how does it reduce the use of restrictive practice? Restrictive practice is the service user, you are finding it difficult to contain and control the service user. So you are trying to restrict their freedom, to tame them. But how can you use outcome-based practice and person-centered practice to reduce the use of restrictive practice? Does it make sense? That is what we do there. Okay, I think we can finish this. 5.7, discuss. 5.7, discuss your own and your team members' development needs in relation to the use of restrictive practice. This question is just like the same that we talked about in relation to mental capacity. Your development needs in relation to mental capacity. Act and the use of it. So you apply the same to restrictive practice and the use of it. As a health and social care professional, I need to understand what restrictive practice is. I need to learn. If I think I have limited knowledge, I need to go for further training. I need to make sure I understand the policy, and I need to make sure I apply the policy appropriately and not disadvantage the service user. Basically, you discuss these things. 4 minimum points. And then 6.1, explore local systems, procedures, and agencies in relation to safeguarding children and young people and your own role in this. What it means is this, like what we're talking about when it came to safeguarding here, you are not limited to adults. We are talking also about children and young people. Explore local systems. What are the local? So everyone, you have to write in relation to your local authority area, okay, your local area. You have to find out which local safeguarding board. I hope you are making notes. 6.1. Find out the local safeguarding board in your local area. Find out what their role and responsibilities are. Find out the safeguarding, the agencies, the safeguarding agencies. There is, or we have what we call NSPCC. Anyone heard of NSPCC? Then we have Childline. Anyone heard of Childline? Then we have Save the Children. Anyone heard of Save the Children? All of these are agencies that, sorry?
Yeah, they work with children, all of these organizations.
Very good. Very good. So those are agencies that have to do with safeguarding children and young people. So basically you explore them, you talk about them, identify them, talk about their role in safeguarding. And then when it says your own role, what is your own role there? You need to know them. You need to know the work they do. You need to know how to make referrals to them and how to use their services to safeguard children and young people that you may work with. Simple. And the final question, support team members to understand why everyone has a responsibility to act on concerns in relation to abuse of a child or a young person. And then the second one, support your team members to understand their role in responding to concerns about the safeguarding of a child or young person, or if disclosure or allegations arise. So basically saying, how would you support your team to understand their role in relation to responding to, is that what you would do in your own situation? How would you support them to know how to respond? And how would you support them to know that everyone has responsibility when it comes to acting on concerns? Yeah, so what you would do, what you would do in your own role, which we look at earlier on. Here it says, how would you support your team members, a colleague, to be able to do that? Okay, so basically, this is what the assignment is about. Now, there are 2 major learning outcomes that we have not included in these questions. Those are observable criteria. You don't have to write anything on them. You can use a role play to achieve them or work products to achieve them. And so we'll look at that after we have finished with the written bit. Okay. Thank you very much. If you have questions, I would be happy if you write them down. And then when we meet on Monday, we can look at the questions before we go into our lesson on Monday. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
So, in terms of the recording, do we have access to these recordings?
Yes, it will be sent to you. I think Lalita is recording for us today. It will be sent to Mansi, and Mansi will send it to all of you. We had 2 recordings that I needed to send. I would do well and send those ones on the same unit. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for
Can
your
you
time.
also remind them to send us a PowerPoint, please? What was used last
Yes,
month?
I will send a message to Mansi now, and yeah, she will action that. Thank you, Flora.
Did we
Thank
miss
you all.
anything?
Sorry?
Before we joined, it looks like you said we missed a session or 2.
Yes.
Is it in any way included in the assignment?
Yes.
If
All
that could be sent to us as well, please.
okay. Yes. It's all covered in the assignment, and all the PowerPoint presentation will be sent to you. If you read and you don't understand anything, we'll explain that. Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you all so
Okay.
very much.
Yeah, thank you, Krish.
Thank you, and see you on Monday. Have a wonderful week.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah, bye.
Bye.